to Access to Justice. I'm your host, Heather Malarick of Merrick Law. My co-host today is Evan Clark of Kahane Law. Hey, Evan, how you doing?
I'm great, Heather. How are you?
I'm well. I'm cleaning out the cobwebs a little bit. We're just coming off of Christmas break as we record this. So kind of getting back into how does my mouse work? What are my passwords? Those kinds of things.
That's always the thing I forget. How does my mouse work? I just look at it for about 5 minutes. I'm like, what do you do with it? I don't know if you've seen Star Trek 4, but there's this time where Scotty is trying to give these people the formula for transparent aluminum. And he's not sure how to do it because, he's used to just talking to the computer. And so the guy points at the mouse and he says, oh, and then he picks it up like this and he's like, computer. Hello, computer. And then, he says, a keyboard, how quaint. Cracks his knuckles and commences to type at 5 billion words per minute. Because obviously, if you're from the future and don't use keyboards anymore, you would be so good at them.
You'd be very proficient at typing. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. One of the best Star Trek movies, even if you're not a Star Trek fan, because, they go back in time and they're in San Francisco in 1984 or something like that, or 1986. Recipe for laughs.
Little vintage snapshot there, hey? Cool.
Yeah.
Well, we're also joined. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. You also mentioned passwords, and I used a password. I don't even want to talk about it, but I will. I used a password manager. I got hacked.
I'm not aware of who you're talking about. It was in the news a little bit. Yeah.
Not the most straightforward with people as to what was taken. And then we're accessed again and things got worse. And so I'm like, I'm out of here, and I switched. So I did actually have to make new password and move passwords over. It's not the same as forgetting your passwords, but kind of.
Probably just about as much fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're also joined today by our very special guest, Kim McDonald of McDonald Advisory. Kim's financial advisor and insurance advisor with Raymond James Limited. Kim, how are you doing? Were you able to type quickly and or execute functions with your mouse today?
I'm laughing about the password thing because I'm like everybody else. I have a secret spot where I've got mine, and I just quickly looked to see how many usernames and passwords I have for our industry of investments and insurance. I have 156 usernames and passwords that I have to track that I use fairly frequently. So I understand why Evan would use a program to help him with that. We don't have a program at our firm.
And you're not allowed to just use one because it would be a best practice.
Right.
And I don't even know, would IROC let you?
No. Well, I think there are some firms who have some programs that they employ, that they use. But I know we get 85 million hacks a year. So whoever we choose needs to be,
hack-proof, and good luck.
Yeah.
And how often do you have to change those passwords? I mean, maybe we don't want to talk too much about that because then, you've got the hacker just waiting like, oh, perfect.
They're all different. Yeah. Some it's all the time and some it's not that often.
What a pain. What a royal pain.
So I think it's all funny like this. The future, we'll see what it holds for usernames and passwords, but I look forward to a better scenario in the future where we don't have these silly things. It's just scan our eyeballs and we're into everything, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm chit-chatting too much and I'm excited about our guests, so I'll just zip up.
Oh my goodness, so am I. And I think that probably some of actually what we've chatted about here will dovetail nicely with what our guest is going to talk about, I hope. So I'm very pleased to welcome Laura Tamblyn Watts to the episode today. Hi, Laura, how are you?
Hi, well, I can't even tell you the stress that passwords give me. So I'm right there with you.
Laura Tamblyn Watts is the founder and CEO of Canage, which is Canada's national seniors advocacy organization. Laura is a very passionate advocate on a variety of issues affecting older Canadians, including long-term care and home care, financial security, elder abuse, healthcare, ageism, and inclusion of marginalized communities. So I think these are all topics that fascinate all three of us. So I'm so excited to have you here and to talk with you about some of these topics. So welcome to Access to Justice.
I'm excited to be here. And these issues that we're talking about, whether it be computer literacy or just kind of forgetting how things work, of course, are one of the issues that we think about when we're thinking about our aging population. But it's good to remember it's not just people at a certain age, it's really all of us that have some of these challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, technology is changing so quickly, and hackers and scammers are changing just as quickly as technology does. So absolutely, it's not just limited to older folks, is it?
Well, we think about the capital markets that Kim and all of you are so passionate about, but we also think about the Black capital markets, and I mean sort of Black markets, but in a really big and sophisticated way. Because when we're thinking about scam artists, and Evan, my fingers are crossed that you don't have any breaches that these are going to touch, but when you think about scam artists and fraud artists, they are, of course, in the ultimate capital market. If it doesn't work, they go out of business. So they're always shifting, always changing. And in the same way that many professional sales folks will refer or even give a referral fee to take care of clients in a particular way, that same thing happens, of course, in this Black capital market, where your information is being sold and resold at quite a really terrifying rate. And particularly with vulnerable people with mental capacity issues, in some cases older people, which are not all the same thing, but do fall within this sort of target-rich environment, that information gets sold on and on again. So if you get a phone call and they hook you, or whether you get a phishing scam and they hook you, those hooked ones go between $5 and $10 for a referral. And that's a very expensive referral, as anyone will tell you, for customer acquisition. And so it's in many ways even more sharp than we're seeing in our usual business practices. And so if you pick up the phone and you get, someone trying to clean your air ducts, or, doing fake HVAC, or wanting to do construction, and you get hooked, that information, your age, where you live, aspects of your speech, whatever information they have on your, the numbers associated with you, whether they be passwords or Visa cards or other credit cards, MasterCards, or whether it be information about your address or your age, all of that is being constantly resold. And so we can't lean back on our heels. It constantly has to be updated.
Huh.
Is that the same thing as gleaning information from seniors on Facebook via those? I think they're like cute little questions that.
If I could just sort of yell into Facebook, don't answer these, I would. What's your favorite color? What's your pet's first name? What's the street that you grew up on? These should all sound very familiar to you. They're cute little games that people play and post on Facebook. They are entirely based at guessing your passwords. Those are all those security questions. And that's important because there's two pieces of that. One, they're your passwords. So I might put my cat's name or my dog's name in as my actual password, although not if I was clever, but there you go. We all do these types of things. Or alternatively, those are the security reset questions. What's your mother's maiden name? What's the street you grew up on? So those types of security questions. So no, that's an entirely different version. And just to make you even more uncomfortable, it's not individuals there. Those are giant scraping programs that go through social media and capture those in a blink of an eye.
Right. So you're just up against the machine in that case. It's not just you. It's worse than you, David, against Goliath. It's
worse than you
thought.
expect is actually kind of what we should be talking about. But of course, what's important is we don't just want people to say, this is so difficult, we shouldn't do any of it. Because at the same time, we're encouraging people to take control of your finances, access your information online. If you lose your pass card or credit card or something else, you should be able to put a pause on it electronically until you find it again. All of these great ways of interacting with your financial and increasingly legal world are good as well. So it's neither a sword nor a shield, but there are these forces out there, and it's no longer the kind of the waiter or waitress at the restaurant trying to take your credit card anymore. It's far more robust. The good news is we have protections as well, and they're getting better and better as well. But it just means that we cannot just turn away and pretend that it's not happening. We actually have to police it ourselves.
Well, I don't, Evan, Kim, please jump in, but I'm kind of thinking I have like two questions that are like two different paths. Maybe you tell me where we start. One of the questions is what are the most common types of sort of scams or areas of vulnerability out there? And then number two is how do folks protect themselves against those scams? So I don't know if that's a good place to start.
Well, everyone here has probably won a lottery from a country you've never visited. I myself have been the recipient of many lotteries for countries I have never been to. I remember finally arriving in Ireland as an example, thinking, well, maybe because I've won apparently the Irish lottery at least 20 or 30 times. I thought, well, now I've at least been to Ireland. But they work. So that is one. You've won a lottery. All you have to do is send some money. That's got all kinds of different versions of it. And it is, win prize, send money. So it could be a cruise. It could be, who knows what, a 50-50 in your local neighborhood that your friend put apparently your name in for, anything that requires you to send some money. What's important is it's really often not the money that matters here, because it may not be a lot of money at the beginning. It's actually to hook you. And then again, you become more valuable and that information can be sent on. So that's one version. Increasingly, and also with older people, romance scams are becoming really, really big. And so that means, folks, as so many else are meeting on the internet. That's a kind of an ordinary thing to do these days. I think it's probably the most ordinary thing to do. But again, designed to hook you. And then what you'll see is you'll start this relationship. And once this relationship starts, someone's going to need a bit of money. Maybe they need travel. They've had some type of emergent situation that they need a little bit of help for. And that hooks. And then after that, the claws are in, and then they kind of get you. And that actually can bloom into some in-person stuff as well. So that's what's important to know, is a lot of this stuff is happening in a boiler room somewhere, as we call them. And there are lots of people on computers that can go up and disappear in a few minutes, speaking of movies. But they also have links to local. And so sometimes if you're not paying up, it'll actually end up people knocking on your door. So again, those threads and threats are more diverse than you think. So that's the romance scam. One that everyone's heard about, I think, at this point, but again, remains one of the top winners, is what we call the grandparent scam. And this is quite sophisticated. It works really well. Usually somebody answers the phone, they're on the phone, they're talking, and they say, hey, grandma, or hey, grandpa, but they wait to hear you say something first, so they can try to figure out what it is. And then they say it's, and it's a bit muffled. You're thinking, who is it? But you've said grandma or grandpa. So they will say, oh, is it you, Alex? Or is it you, Chris? And yes, it's Chris. They'll grab onto that name. So you know what to do to protect yourself from that? Don't supply the information. Don't fill in the blanks. And that's true for everything. And then what they do is they have somebody else who's there. Something bad has happened, typically across the border, whatever border that is. And they don't want you to call mom, or don't call dad. And they need you to send some money. So they hand the phone over. It's a police officer, it's a lawyer, it's a doctor, it's a hospital administrator. And then they need to Western Union, something usually using wire transfers. That's number two. If it's a wire transfer, it's probably a scam, because once money hits the wires, it's almost impossible to get back, as particularly if it's cross border. So number 2, sending money by wire transfer, 99% chance it's going to be a scam. And that one, of course, they'll keep coming back. Now they have more financial needs and more concerns. That was consistently one of the top scams. Then we get into some of the other ones. If it's more in person, there's lots of construction ones. Lots of us need our houses fixed, our roof fixed, our gardens sorted out, something to do with the driveway. And particularly older people often may not be able to see that the roof, isn't in the condition that they say it is, and so on. So they'll have a van, they'll have a card, they may have a website, probably references. It can all look very good. And what they do is they need money, and then they want money in cash. And it's a cash economy. So they coach you for what to say at your financial institution as you take out $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in cash. And again, the cash with the gym bag kind of style. And they do it, and they will bring things. Typically, they'll bring lumber, they'll bring cement, they'll bring whatever it is, and they'll tear up whatever it is. And they'll keep doing this. They need more and more money. And at a certain point, then they just disappear. But those actually are very effective. And I would say one of the biggest trends, so kind of number 5, one of the biggest trends would be using text messages. And many of us will really use text messages to communicate with our intimates, our family, our closest friends, right? It doesn't tend to be a place like email. We've gotten used to the fact that email is going to have a Nigerian prince attached to it, or there's going to be something urgent, or, hello, all you need to do is send me some money and this great thing is going to happen to you.
Right.
But text messages feel closer. So many, many older people are now getting scammed through text messages. And that once you click that link, particularly it looks like a utility. Typically, you're going to see some type of utility bill or government scam. And boy, during COVID-19, did we see a lot of that. Now, what can you do to protect yourself? Well, I'm not going to tell you, as we call it at Canage, to eat right and exercise, because, lots of us know the things that you're supposed to do. And we started off this conversation with the fact that without more than 150 things, how are you supposed to manage? And then Evan was using a program. That's a good idea. It is a good idea, but even that got cracked. Mind you, it is still a good idea. So I think it's important to remember that we're all human. And probably every single one of us has gotten scammed by something. It's just, they only exist because they work. Ultimate capital market. If it didn't exist, it wouldn't be there.
Yeah. So
right. That's an excellent point.
I got a couple of comments. Number one of the things that I'm not too worried about, even though the database is potentially compromised, that I had all my passwords, is for my important accounts, I use two-factor authentication.
Yeah.
So they can't actually enter without the code in whatever way it's done, whether it's through a third party, like I use Google and Microsoft, both have authentication apps, or by text message, which, by the way, they've got ways to scam you and forgetting that text message or authenticator code as well. The key is don't ever tell anybody what it is. But so it's okay. Number 2, I changed the passwords for my sensitive accounts. So my bank accounts and stuff like that, my email account, right away, I changed those. So even if they crack the data they have, which is not a given anyways, but even if they do, the passwords will be out of date. And so they won't be able to access those, even though there's also two-factor authentication. And another thing I'm with you. I'm still a believer of using a program. That's why I just switched to a different program, which, by the way, I like better anyways. The other thing I wanted to say is, yes, I got phished before. And I do, because I have cyber insurance for my practice, they make you do a bunch of stuff, including take some courses and stuff like that, as well as enable two-factor authentication and everything. And so even after doing the course, we're like, so you really know what phishing is and how it works. I still got phished. The benefit was I knew immediately after I sent the information that I had been phished. And so I immediately was able to change the password and my account wasn't compromised. And it was just a simple Facebook one. So, my uncle posted something and I clicked on it to see what it was. And then it was like, you've got to log in. So I logged in, and then I was like, no, I'm already logged into my phone. I just got phished. And so then I just changed the password, and everything's fine. But if I hadn't have caught that, then, you know, we've all met someone or had a friend who's all of a sudden sent us weird messages on Facebook.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's no question. And that's part of the reality of life. I think for people to understand that when we're thinking about using common information, there's both the preventive pieces. Let's make sure that we're making things kind of easy as possible. And then there's the proactive pieces. What do you do afterwards and how do you reset? And one of the organizations that I really love is a not-for-profit called the Glue Society, GLUU, the Glue Society. And it is a not-for-profit in British Columbia, but they work across Canada as well, which does computer literacy, you know, for free, particularly for older people. And it is terrific. And you can take online courses, and you can do top tips of the day that they send out to you. And they'll talk and think about two-factor authentication. What is it? How do you do it? Well, the Glue Society goes through all of it and breaks it out. I'm a huge fan of the work that they do.
That's a great suggestion. You know, my father-in-law, I'll point him out. I'm sure he doesn't mind. He is terrified of computers, very deeply suspicious of them. But part of that is he thinks if he doesn't learn how to use them and just uses, you know, banks and checkbooks, that he can't get scammed. But I don't think that's true. And in some ways, I think doing your things online and being able to check it online easily and regularly could prevent some of that stuff. So it's wonderful to know that there's a resource like that out there for people to get a little more comfortable with technology, but know what's safe.
And I think that's so much of what it is. We have a very, very high usage of technology for older people. So in Canada, about 87% of people over the age of 75 use the internet at least once a day. And typically the average older person in Canada has 5 connected devices to the internet. And so there's an extremely high literacy rate, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we all learn in the same way. And that is just true. So if you have digital natives, you know, you'll know what those 3 little things look like on the top of the screen that you might say is a hamburger. It doesn't look anything like, someone told me it looks like a hamburger. I thought, okay, there are 3 slashes in a row. How is that a hamburger? I mean, it looks like 3 slashes in a row. I mean, if you told me that's what it was, I would look for it. And I am not that old. And so if you are trying to use terminology like that, it's not very helpful for people who, you know, by their wildest dreams wouldn't imagine that that would be a hamburger. So that's why while the digital literacy is there, sometimes there's not that confidence. And the building of the confidence is what's important, Heather. Just as I'm saying, you know, that concern about it as an area of exposure is actually not as big a deal as long as they know what to do. So it's the addressing, what do you know what to do? You don't want to get yourself in more trouble. Well, there's ways of dealing with that. But just to pick up on your point, frauds and scams, of course, do not orient themselves just with cell phones and just with computers. The good old telephone is one of the best ones we ever have. And for that matter, people knock on your door just as much, although a little bit less these days, but it is in existence. The last one is, you know, one of the oldest tricks in the book, which is sort of a confidence scam. And we see that fraudsters will often penetrate really protected zones, whether it be faith communities or cultural communities, ethnocultural communities where languages are spoken that aren't English or French, and build up confidence within them, and then literally go ripping through those communities. So if you don't have your technology or you're not on the internet, you may be missing many tools to either be aware of it on the preventive side or to do something about it on the proactive side at the other end.
Man, this stuff just makes me mad. I get so mad thinking about people sitting in that, now I know the term, the boiler room, thinking up these things and just working scams and taking advantage of vulnerable people. It just, yeah, geez.
Points of big change or confusion are really at the center sometimes of these issues. So just to give you cast your mind back to the early days of COVID. So think about March and April of 2020, if you can, if you're willing to do that. we knew that it was going to be such a huge issue when they brought in things like CERB or other government benefits. And one of the very first things we ever produced at Canage was how to spot frauds and scams about COVID-19. Well, we had people who were trying to sell snake oil. The snake oil salesman, that's a long tradition, whether it be at a carnival or whether it be showing up on your cell phone as a link. But we also had huge misinformation around things like CERB and other types of benefits. And because there was changing on a regular basis, I cannot tell you the number of people who would click that. And again, it could just look like a perfectly valid thing. It doesn't have crazy numbers and letters. It doesn't have somebody's Hotmail account. It actually looks like a legitimate thing. But once you click it and you start to put your information in, particularly we saw ones that said, you can do it online. We're moving everything to a mobile app. And then, of course, what they want more of anything is your SIN number. Anyway, hugely. We saw about a 2,000% increase in the first 3 months.
Wow.
Now, people got a little bit better at it once they knew, but because of course many things were moving to mobile or electronic and on a very quick basis, those giant spikes were on the front end. So people have learned, but once they've got information like your SIN number, it's not like you can change that.
That's interesting too, because I know that there was like a degree of suspicion then when like traveling, for example, came later and they were like, oh, get this app to authenticate that you've been vaccinated. And then I know people were fearful or concerned about that are like, well, is that legitimate? Should I be downloading that? So it's hard because we all want to leverage these things. We want to use them to make our lives easier. The government wants us to trust in these tools, but then they're exploited by ne'er-do-wells. Is that
a few things that you can do right off the bat that I can say, like, here are 5 things to look for.
Awesome. Okay.
That will always be a fraud. Okay. Number 1, if they want you to pay for something on any type of a gift card. And you think to yourself, how is this possible? How is it that people think that they can pay the Canadian Revenue Agency with Apple cards? But look, people have a wide variety of digital literacy. They may be more afraid of the governments. They may come from countries where, exploitation is something that happens in the government more than you might wish it to. In, for instance, in Canada, there's all kinds of reasons. But if they want a gift card, it's a fraud. Hang up. Okay. If you're talking on the phone or communicating any other way electronically, and they want to get all your security questions, if they're asking for your security questions, it's a fraud. The very point of having security questions, what's your mother's middle name? Hopefully they're not using that one anymore. But the point of asking the security questions is so that they can reset things. Okay. So if anyone's asking you for your security questions or asking you random things about your pet, so much streets that you used to live on and your favorite color, that's a fraud. Hang up. If you see someone who is asking, for you to send them money in order to get something, that's a fraud. Really, there's almost nothing in this world where you need to do that except paying your taxes. I'll get to that one later. But if you have to send money in order to get something, that's a fraud. The only time where that may actually be a real thing that I've ever found is when you may need to pay some customs or customs or taxes for something, a package, for instance, coming into the country. But that's a well-known fraud too. So if you really have to do that, call the originator, whether it's FedEx or UPS or Canada Post. Don't click anything and go through the actual web listed telephone number that you'll see. Because occasionally they will actually need you to pay for customs or any of those types of tariffs. But again, don't click the link, call the number. Another reason if it's a fraud, this one you would have taken, Evan, in your course. If it's online, hover over the actual email address that it came, and they can look very, very good. But even if it appears to be something like such and such at thisbank.com or UPS or your utility bill or whatever it is, if you hover over it, that cover link will disappear and you will see the real number, and it's going to be like Bob27 at hotmail.com or something like that. So you click and hover to reveal the address. And that's a good thing. Get good at spotting those, although it's not perfect. And the last one is, it's the easy one. If it looks too good, it's too good. And that's hard because we all want to live in expectations of hope. But if something sounds like too good an offer, yeah, it's going to be too good an offer. And that's because they're out to scam you.
So what's the effect on seniors when they get scammed?
There's a study, it's a bit of an older study, I think it underestimates it, that found that an older person who's scammed out of $20,000 or more in Canada loses up to 18 months off their life. In many cases, it really is a matter of life and death. If you have a significant loss of funds, and remember, you're at the older end of your earning years, you may only be deaccumulating, you may be getting passive income, possibly, but likely you're living on a very fixed income unless you're extraordinarily lucky or have done a fabulous financial plan with folks here. And so being able to recover from that loss, which has already, usually had taxes taken off of it at one way or the other, is hugely impactful. So if you lose, say, $20,000 and you're 25, you're probably going to have the chance to make that money up. If you lose $20,000 when you're 85, you certainly are not going to be able to do that very easily. So it also means a giant change, usually in your housing, your ability to stay where you are. It can have a difference between making choices of getting heat or eating, changing people's prescriptions, and all of that is functional. What I think is important to know is it also has a huge aspect of fear, and it can really make you not feel comfortable making other decisions. And so we see many people, if they don't have that really resilient bravado kind of associated with them, getting more and more scared, pulling back and getting more socially isolated. So it has not only a financial impact, but it also can have a lifeline impact in terms of what you'd spend your money for. And then lastly, it has a huge psychological impact on people. I'm just full of good news today, right?
But I think you're bang on. My grandma had her vacuum taken. So a repairman came to the door and told her he'd fix her vacuum, and he took it. And it was a great vacuum. And I was, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal, but she never, ever got over it. And I think that was such a little thing. What's happening to the people who are getting, I mean, there must be so much shame for getting taken advantage of. And I think, it sounds like the Glue Society can maybe help out with training seniors so they don't get put in that position.
It's so important to also remember the fear that's behind that. So shame and stigma are the biggest reasons why people don't report. The second reason people don't report is it actually, in many cases, nobody cares. And that's a terrible thing to say, but no one cares about your grandma's vacuum. Not really. We're going to report it to the police. I mean, okay, they will give you a number and you may be able to claim it on your insurance, but that's it. So there's really almost like no one to call. If you do call the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, which is staffed nowhere near to what it needs to be staffed, and they're very nice people, you're probably going to get a phone number to leave a message on, or you may be able to give that information online, but they can't help you get any money back. They can't help you. What you're asking you to do is record it, because they keep statistics and tracks about which kinds of frauds come. As I say, they're very good. They're part of, our RCMP, but they're not going to really help you either. And then the third reason is the biggest one. Fundamentally, the concern is for the 85-year-old, not the 25-year-old, that if you get defrauded or scammed, people are going to start thinking you've lost mental capacity. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happens. Ironically, people say, well, why wouldn't you do it? And I think the reason why they don't want it is they don't want anyone to know, not just because they feel embarrassed about it, although that is typically very true, but they don't want the kids or the grandkids to start thinking, grandma and grandpa have lost it. And that would then lead to perhaps to questions about their other decision-making abilities and their abilities to make their own decisions in terms of their finances in particular.
Yeah.
But it's super ageist. I mean, I got caught in I teach frauds and scams, and I happened to click something. It was sort of 3 click-throughs. It was innocent. And I noted it too, Evan, and I stopped it and I did the reset. But it didn't pierce the heart of me I thought to myself, heck, yeah, they got me. And I took the steps that I needed to do to take it. And it wasn't that big a deal. A friend of mine's sister, who, is just 60 years old, she's not an older person, was caught on one of these phishing scams and was providing blithely her SIN number and everything else. And, she ended up having to do credit monitoring. Of course, we have 2 credit monitoring systems that costs money every single month to monitor your credit scores. And quite quickly, people were saying, well, the cost to monitor your credit versus the cost of how much money was taken from you, that risk is kind of offsetting because it is very expensive to do that. So it really does mean that we have to watch for these things. We have to learn about these things. And then, we have to make sure that we're proactive. I encourage people to think about it as traffic. Think about walking as a pedestrian in traffic. Could you get killed crossing the street? Yeah, most people don't, though. I mean, every once in a while, there's a terrible, tragic accident. Some people will get bumped. Someone will bump you. It's probably not the end of the world. You're not going to be damaged too much. But it doesn't mean that you don't walk outside and never cross the street. It means you look both ways. You're able to identify when there are dangers present. You don't just rely on the little person saying, yeah, feel free to cross. If you got a truck coming your way, you should be using your common sense and reading the room. Or in this case, reading the road.
Right. Get out there, live your life, leave the house, just beware and take some safety precautions.
Yeah. And in fact, leaving the house and being online and being engaged is in many ways the best thing you can possibly do. It's just, again, learning to make sure that we don't make every kind of password our cat's first name. We don't put all of your information about our security questions up on Facebook because it looks like a cute and fun thing to do. And we make sure that when we're thinking about phone calls, that we're doing so with a skeptical ear these days, and we don't fill in information. I got a call the other day from the CRA, and I looked at it and I thought it said from Sudbury, and I thought, okay, well, where's the CRA located? I don't think it's in Sudbury. Maybe it's work from home. Like, you're starting to have these questions to yourself. And it was, Bob from the CRA, and I just hung up and I thought, I don't think Bob's actually calling me from the Canadian Revenue Agency, but in case there's something wrong, I know how to go find the CRA and I will call them proactively. And that's fine. As it turns out, Bob was just calling, I think, from his boiler room in his house, trying to get my tax information. But if someone calls you, you can say, thanks very much. I don't do things, on the phone. Feel free to send me a letter, or, feel free to send me information. I don't do donations at the door either. I'll say, thank you very much. I really appreciate what you're doing. I do things myself and I appreciate that. Close the door. A lot of holiday scams on that. And it's hard because you're competing with real charities who are doing it. But I say, I do make my charitable donations, but I'll do that directly. Thank you for walking the streets thinking, I don't know if you're trying to scam me or if you're really raising money, but in any case, I can take control by doing it myself.
I think those are really helpful tips, Laura, there, like little scripts to know where to practice or have in your pocket in advance, because I think most of us have a hard time saying no, thank you, particularly to a human on the phone, even harder to someone who's showing up at your door. So I think those are really good suggestions. My husband's is, I have 2 and I love them, thanks. Or I already donated to that charity yesterday. I mean, that's his script.
He used to make little stickers by the phone that said, it's okay to hang out or just hang out.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to be rude to anyone. I mean, to Bob on the CRA, I literally just clicked. That was the end of it. And so sometimes if you engage, remember, they hook you. They're good at hooking you. One of the other things I make a suggestion is, don't necessarily answer with the words, yes, because sometimes people are recording your voice, and when you can do those voice prompts, they'll say things like yes and no. So if you answer the phone yes, they could be recording you doing that. And if they get into that phone tree information, they didn't do it. I usually say, hi, it's Laura speaking. But if it's a number I don't know, I'll usually just say hello, or I'll wait for them to say something. You may hear a little bit of a pause, and that will be a phone tree. Now, that could be legitimately coming from a company that's doing calls, but we've all heard that, right? When you pick up the phone and there's this long period of time and there's this little click, and so you could be absolutely sure that that's at best customer service for something and at worst a scam.
Those are all good tips.
Yeah, and I mean, like, do you really want to talk to customer service? No, so just hang up.
If they're calling you, no, probably
right.
not.
and like, my wife we approach these very differently. Like, I'm annoyed when I get a phone call and it's some useless call, like TELUS calling because, like, hey, it's like an upsell call because I use them for one service, but I don't want them for any other service. Like, hey, we got cell phones. I'm like, I don't want to talk about this right now. I'm not interested. Bye. And it's a little rude, but like, it's also rude for them to interrupt the middle of my day. So I'm fine with just being abrupt. Like, let's get straight to the point. I don't want to waste your time. You're not going to waste my time anymore. I'm not interested. Goodbye, and I hang up.
And what's important there as well is, in many cases, you can make sure that you are asked to be struck off their call list. And many people don't realize that, because you figure, you've clicked something that says they could reach out to you. And we all do that. It's often in your terms and conditions or something that you can click to say that they're allowed to reach out to you. And so when I get those calls, I'll say things like, can you just please make sure that you remove me from your call database? I'll wait here till you confirm that you've done it. Thank you very much. You've confirmed that you've done it. They're always really surprised because most people don't know that you can ask to be unsubscribed to the phone as well as you can be unsubscribed to email. That's one thing. Many of you will know about the no call list. That's a funny kind of one. So the reason why I say it's funny is it doesn't apply to not-for-profits and charities. And I run a not-for-profit. By joy, don't call anybody, but anyway. But of course, it also doesn't apply to scammers. So I always figure if you're on the no call list, it's not going to help when you are actually still getting scammed or it's a charity. And working for charitable based organizations is sometimes hard because you really are legitimately calling from a point. So what I recommend, if you don't know, if you are on the no call list but you're still getting charity or it might be a scam, again, same thing, say thanks very much. I'm not going to answer this call right now, but I'm going to be calling your office directly to learn more. Again, take the control back, call the real number.
And many people have a little oopsies where they take a call they shouldn't and get on some sort of Albanian or Serbian call list. And I know there is a function with most telephone companies where you can sign up where somebody has to press a number to get through, and it's an alternating number. I'm not sure the mechanics of getting that set up, but I'm guessing, Laura, you might know a little bit about that.
They're changing as fast as anything else does as well. Now these days, most people have cell phones and they don't have landlines. And so when it doesn't really apply to cell phones, and that's one of the big important things, is so many of these things are actually based for landlines, and most people don't have landlines anymore. So the technology for cell phones is not the same at the moment yet as the technology for landlines. So it can be a bit difficult. One of the things that we do see, particularly with cell phones, but this can also be with a landline as well, is people who copy a number. And we've all done that. We've all perhaps missed a call and you call them back and you say, oh, hey, I'm really sorry. It's Laura. I missed a call from this number. You don't know what it is, right? And they're like, I didn't call you. Oh, okay. But what they've done is they've cloned the numbers, right? So it doesn't look like Bob from Sudbury from CRA, although actually I did look it up. There are some CRA offices in Sudbury. I just got curious. But in this case, I thought, why would they be calling me from there? I mean, that seems like a strange place. But again, with work from home right now, some of those numbers have all been quite different. They're not using the landline. People are working from wherever. So again, that same thing, it may be that it looks like a friend or it looks like a company, but actually they've cloned that. And of course, is that illegal? Yes. But is there technology available? Yes. Again, the same is the best thing to do. Hang up. Even if you're interested, even if you think like that is a thing you want, maybe you want to know about that offer, or maybe you want to know about what the CRA wants, or, you're thinking that you might actually give to that charity. Just say, thanks very much for the information. I'm not interested at this time. And then ask to be off their call number. If it's a fake one, they'll push back on that. Like, well, we can't do that. Oh, yes, you can. And then call yourself. Take the control yourself. That's really the big key.
Take the control of yourself.
Write that down, Heather.
I'm writing it down.
Another thing that people may not know is it's related to this, but not exactly the same, is if you are being called by collection agencies, you can also have that stop there. And if you request that they stop calling you, they have to stop calling you.
And they don't always.
No, and sometimes they don't, and they can be really rude and really harassing. And so, if that's the situation you find yourself in, you can always go to a lawyer and they can send a demand letter, and that usually stops it pretty quick.
Evan, do people call you for that kind of thing? Is that why you know about it?
No, but I know about it because I've done it before. But like we had a client at my old firm, and I think they're whatever. I can't remember all the details, but that was happening to them. Might have even been in an estate file. I can't remember. Anyways, and the lawyer had to be pretty assertive. Like even I think there had to be more than one contact from the lawyer to make sure that it stopped threatening litigation, which is legitimate. So, and I just brought it up because I was out with Sandra Landry last night. Some listeners might recognize Sandra is in the Two-Timer Club for Access to Justice. And that's one thing that she mentioned. She gets a lot of clients in who are getting harassed so badly by collection agencies that they go to her to make it stop. And that just made me think of that. You have some rights about who's able to get your number and use your number to call you. Of course, those types of things don't apply to scammers, though. As Laura said, it's like all the firearm laws in the world aren't going to stop, criminals from owning guns. Same concept.
No, it is absolutely. The ones that we get, Evan, in terms of demand letters and things, really often have to do with powers of attorney. And this is where I spent a lot of time talking and thinking about, is because they go across the spectrum of very legitimate use of a proper legal document, which is a good and important thing to have, but talk about a sword and a shield, all the way up to people who are trying to use power of attorney documents, again, called different things in different provinces, whether you're in Halifax, you might call them a healthcare directive and a power of attorney for the financial one. In BC, you might call it a representation agreement for the healthcare piece. And again, power of attorney. Usually the power of attorney stuff is the same wherever you are. Of course, in Ontario, you'll have a power of attorney for personal care and a power of attorney for property. But this is where we get people who try to do things either very legitimately, but they're doing it wrong. So they think that just because they have that document or just because they have been appointed, it now all of a sudden unlocks the cash stores of mom and dad, when they're not. That's not their role. In fact, it's quite the contrary. They're supposed to be a fiduciary, the highest level of obligation and care. Or alternatively, they are actually scamming you and getting you to sign a power of attorney document. And so in things like romance scams or other types of new best friend scams, you have people who come into your life and then they start being helpful and then they start inserting themselves. And with home care shortages being such a difficult thing and people worrying that mom and dad are living alone and maybe they're going to fall and they can't get enough home care and so on, having a new best friend move in can absolutely be an important and good thing to happen if it was legitimate. But of course, it is a predatory aspect. And then what happens is they push space between family and friends that pre-existed and the older person, whether that means that when you phone, they're always sleeping, or when you come to the door, they can't come to the door because they're at an appointment or whatever it is, but that space between there. And then they get the older person to create a new power of attorney document. And of course, in some provinces that requires a lawyer, in some provinces it doesn't require a lawyer. It's easier to scam them if they don't require a lawyer. I would say more than, but many lawyers don't pay too much attention to powers of attorney document, quite wrongly. But if they do it and they take instructions and they don't have information about what's going on, they may be quite innocently doing a very simple legal thing, or they've downloaded it.
No, don't justify that. That would be negligent, and they should be getting ready to make a claim on their insurance.
I am also a lawyer, and have been one for a really long time. And I have to tell you, yes, you're absolutely right. But did you ever learn in law school about a power of attorney? I don't know anyone who really has, unless they happen to take an estates class. It's one of those things that is an incredibly important legal document. And in some cases, I would offer perhaps more powerful and important than a will, because it's taking care of the person while they're alive. I always figure, well, if you mess up the will, they're dead. And that person, at least, it's very unfortunate, but it's not their fault. At risk. If you mess up power of attorney documents, it actually harms the human being while they're still alive. And if they're incapable of making those choices or they have influence under, absolutely. But people often who don't focus on this area of law treat them as kind of, like almost giveaways or lost leaders and so on at their peril. Because I think what we're seeing above all is that power of attorney documents is now the new will challenges. We don't wait anymore for the person to die before we go after the money. They're used very specifically by either, malfeasant family and friends. Either they're doing it because, they don't understand, or they're doing it to get them, or alternatively by scam artists who very specifically target older people and get them to do the documents. And then they're away in many cases. And then it becomes a very complicated situation after that.
Yeah, well, that's I didn't know that people offer them that way. That was I agree with you. That is at their peril. Because I do estate planning, but I did take estates at law school, and I did that because I knew I was articling at a firm where I was going to be practicing that. And one of the first areas that I was confident of practicing, because it's not that complicated, but I was trained on it by someone who had been practicing it for years, was estate planning. And of course, when we say that as lawyers in Alberta, we're really just we're not talking about this kind of estate planning that Kim does. We're talking specifically about the legal documents that you just described and the will. Like Heather doesn't use powers of attorney as a loss leader, that's for sure. And
no, I don't. I'm not a dabbler. I don't.
I think that's really important because, in Alberta, of course, we have new legislation now around co-decision making and assisted decision making legislation, which I think lots of people may not be as familiar with if they're not focusing in this area of law. But the dabbler piece is real. Now, I'm not saying this is true for, all lawyers or most lawyers, but, many people will live, for instance, in a rural area. You don't have to go too far outside a couple of city centers, and the lawyers have to do everything, right? We don't have the advantage of maybe having Calgary, Alberta lawyers who can specialize. If you're in the north and you find a lawyer, you're lucky to find a lawyer, and they're probably doing a little bit of everything as well. Yeah. Now, they may be expert in that or they may not be, but we have seen, I can't tell you the number of charity gifts I've seen where lawyers will donate the making of a will and, powers of attorney type of documents as things. I think my father used to donate that. He's a lawyer as well. And because it's a thing that everybody does need, and it's really important. But when you're giving the gift of legal advice, that really helps. These days, though, running through those what ifs are important. And it's not as much just going through all the family and friends what ifs, but we also need to think again, what if something goes wrong? And the something going wrong would be a fraud artist or a scam artist, a new best friend, something like that, who takes you into a bank and gets them to do a banking power of attorney, which before I die, I'm going to get people to stop doing because it destroys any estate plan that you've usually had. So you'll have a teller who has no legal training, or often not a lot of advanced financial training either, for that matter, offering up to, you can just fill in this form and, it'll cover off everything at this financial institution. And what you'll realize is it revokes the previous power of attorney to the degree that they're different. At best, it makes a disastrous mess. At worst, it's completely undone whatever good estate planning was already done. And that's done as a blithe idea of customer service. And of course, what they've done is they facilitated the exploitation of the older person.
How ironic, because banks are the most annoying organizations when it comes to recognizing and accepting legitimate legal documents related to estate planning. They're the worst. And meanwhile, they'll just make up their own on the spot and they're cool with that. That is so ridiculous.
It's really important that the financial institutions take this seriously. Now, a few years ago, we worked really hard with the Canadian Bankers Association and the government to help create what I call the not very voluntary banking code for seniors. I say it's not very voluntary because even though it's called a voluntary code, there has to be a seniors champion at each financial institution. They report to the CEO of the bank, and the bank CEO has to report to the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada. And one of the things they now have to do is create competencies and do training in this. And before that, they never had to. And so it's starting to roll out. It's starting to get better. There is competency-based training just beginning. Is this about 30 years too late? Yes, but financial institutions where I think we're very concerned with being themselves considered fiduciaries and wanted to make sure that they were just in a commercial relationship. And now what we're seeing is, the scales have tilted. You can't just turn a blind eye to the justice anymore. Speaking of access to justice, you can't just pretend that you're just in a pure commercial relationship, that we do need training associated with marginalized people, older people, people with mental capacity issues in order to make sure that you're not facilitating exploitation. I would also like them to be able to understand that a power of attorney document not created in Ontario is something that, Bay Street in Ontario will recognize. What we see, of course, is that many people who live in other jurisdictions, and I'm talking to you from Nova Scotia right today, when they say we have to send it to legal, what they're really doing is they're sending it to Bay Street in Ontario to look at, and they may not be as familiar with advanced planning documents in other jurisdictions. And that can make you pull your hair out. It will all usually get sorted in the end. But I'm always worried when you go into a bank with a valid power of attorney and they don't look at it, as much as I'm worried when they take 3 days to look at it. There needs to be something in between.
Yeah, there really does. It's because I tell people this as well, is if they're worried about, their power of attorney being misused, I explain to them okay, so first of all, that's against the law. In order for your attorney to do anything that is not in your best interest, it's written right in the power of attorney, more as a reminder, not because it changes anything. So I explain that, but that's cold comfort if they've emptied your bank account. And so yes, potentially the fraudster can be prosecuted, but it's, so also make sure you're choosing somebody that you trust. And, that can be difficult. That can be difficult when you're in a situation, when you're in your senior years. The number of people that you can appoint, it becomes limited. And because if you're older, chances are a lot of friends have died, and you're kind of left with family. And ideally, you want to choose someone that's at least quite a bit younger than you, so that it's not likely they're going to predecease you, and there can be a lot of unknowns there. Anyways,
No, it's absolutely true. I'm actually a huge fan of people really sitting down and thinking about whether or not they want to appoint a trust company. And we've kind of forgotten to do that these days. As the trust companies got gobbled up by the big financial institutions, they kind of disappeared a little bit out of our purview, but now they're back. And I certainly see that during the boomers' years in their planning, they're really surprised that they don't have an easier option to have somebody with specialist knowledge make decisions for them. And then I say, actually you do, but only for financial, not for personal issues. I think the personal care issues are something we're going to have to think about in the near future. In the US, for instance, you could hire a trained professional to make your personal healthcare decisions as well. As you're saying, lots of family and friend either are not the right people to do it, or alternatively, you don't want to burden them with having to do it, or alternatively, you want people who are really expert in doing it. But what people don't realize is that if you appoint a trust company to be your decision maker, they can't charge any more than you would have, your best friend or your family member, your ne'er-do-well nephew who's moved into your basement. And the good news is you never have to worry about the trust company, whether it be one of the big six or one of the smaller trust companies, in dying or moving away or becoming incapable or stealing your money. They're not going to. So it's a good option for people to think through.
Yeah. And I guess for listeners that are interested in a little more information, we had Damien McGrath on a previous episode, who talked about trusts and what his role could be, or the trust company's role in those kind of situations. So that's that's something we talked about before. I don't know that listeners, of course, if you're only listening, you didn't see my eyes get huge when, Laura, you mentioned the bank power of attorney. I didn't realize that was a thing, and that's a bit shocking. So
that's terrifying.
What if you're a loved one with someone in your family that you might be concerned about? Is there anything that you can do or watch for that are signs or protective actions that you can take, or talk to your parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, whoever about to make sure that they're not being taken advantage of, or ways to have those conversations? It's tough because you don't want to take away someone's autonomy, but you also want to make sure that they don't get taken advantage of, right?
That is, of course, the balance there. What I think is really helpful, and many of us will just come off holidays with family members where you may be kind of more recently in touch with seeing folks that you may not have seen in a little while, is bringing up the conversation not about them. So bringing it up about yourself. So we all started talking about examples that we have of being, defrauded or clicking on a link or something like that. One of the things that family members often get defensive about, quite rightly, is when you show up and like, what do you know? In your mind, you're still the 16-year-old kid who can't pick up their socks, and they have a lifetime of experience. So, listening to you going on about how they should live their life may be a little bit much for them. But saying,
Are you at my Christmas dinner? I'm joking.
Parents too, and expressing to them that you're thinking about your powers of attorney, and you're thinking about your will, or you're thinking about whatever it is that we're talking about, and opening up the conversation about things that you've been thinking about. Now, you are thinking about it. Now, you maybe were thinking about it more because you're worried about them, but never mind, you are still thinking about it, and you should be thinking about it as well, because everyone over the age of majority should have these documents. So don't come into it with, hey, mom, dad, you're getting older, and I'm really worried that you're losing your mind, or that you've got dementia, or you're making bad decisions. But alternatively, come in and say, my partner and I were sitting around thinking, and we're, wondering, and, what would you do? And what are your thoughts? And so on and so forth. And open it up as a conversation. So that's tip number one. Open it up as a conversation. Share what you're doing and ask them some advice. And then that opens it up so they can ask you advice too. The second thing is have a time of year to do it. And I think scheduling it is really important. So in the same way that financial professionals have to talk about KYC, the know your client, where you have to check in and see how things are and things have changed and so on and so forth. I always figure there's two things that are inevitable: death and taxes. So end of March, April is a good time to be thinking about this as well, because it's all part of the same idea of your financial and frankly, physical well-being. So add this in annually as a review point. And for financial and legal professionals out there, add this to your roster. Even do a little check-in, a 15-minute check-in with your clients, and around that time, with enough time to make any adjustments if you want. But turning your mind to it, I think at that point is really helpful as an estate wellness checkup. And that also helps you with things like frauds and scams and so on, because if they have a new best friend, or there's a new person that they want to do crazy investments with that only speaks their language, or any of these red flags, then at least you have that information that you might not otherwise have. So schedule a time, death and taxes, do it in the spring. And the third piece of advice I have is remember that it doesn't matter how old you are, you have the presumption of mental capacity. So don't go in assuming that you're incapable just because you're a certain age, and family often wants to do that, but rather think about ways that technology can help. So many people won't realize you can do fingertip technology, on your computers, or you can do bioscans. Make sure that people feel comfortable understanding the fact that you can have two-factor identification, or you can go to somewhere like the Glue Society to learn more. And so to take that proactive charge by learning some different technological advances, including perhaps limits on accounts or two signatures for really big accounts. And then my extra piece of, those are 3 tips, but here's my one. Don't take a power of attorney document from a bank, from a teller. And the other one is, for the love of all that's holy, please, do feel free to sit down with your legal and financial professional and do a really deep dive into your life. That, good legal and financial professionals will take the time with you to talk through who your relationships are and what they like. So go through a series of what ifs. Many of us don't ever think about when things could go wrong. And yet, I often tell the story of when there was a family reunion, there was 27 people all in the same boating accident, and they'd all just appointed each other as financial advisors, powers of attorney, and joint account holders, and they were all in a disaster. So try to make sure that you have somebody who wouldn't travel with you, and that could be a trust account if you're thinking about having that for your option. You don't have to have a family member or friend for your finances. You can do a trust account.
Right.
I think it's also important, people may not know that the good financial advisors or investment advisors out there want the kids involved. So some adult children might not know that they can meet the financial advisor as a group and start to build a relationship there. Vice versa, parents might not know that they can bring their kids into those decisions just to be a part of the meeting. And I think that's a really important piece as people get older, to have kids involved in, especially when there's money involved.
And that's really important for good relationships and really important for good ones. You have to be a little bit careful, though, because you do need to figure out who your client is. And so do some planning around that in advance. If you're going to have a joint family, make sure that people realize that the family members are also your most likely people to take advantage of you. 2/3 of all abuse and neglect happen from family members and those closest. So the same person that you're most likely to choose to be a power of attorney person is also your person who's most likely to violate your trust. I know it sounds terrible, but there you go. It's true. So do a pre-planning meeting with your financial or legal professional about what you'll disclose and what won't you disclose. You'll talk very carefully about what information they want to have and what information you don't want to have your kids see, and sit down and really think it through about what you're trying to achieve at those, as opposed to just kind of inviting people in. So Kim, your idea is a great idea. I really appreciate that. And that important planning around it is going to be key. Where I see financial professionals get in trouble with lawyers is when they forget that know your client piece, and they forget the who is your client piece too. And they start disclosing information amongst the family, many of whom are, as I will call, professional waiters. They're waiting for their inheritance. And in some cases,
we're highly trained in that area. Well, I mean, at the big firms, we're highly trained to make sure that we aren't sharing any information that shouldn't be shared. But it does help us sniff out, because sometimes elderly people will want their kids in joint accounts, and that's something we are really scared about doing. And big conversations need to be had. And I can't understand how that can happen at an investment firm without even meeting the kids to sniff out bad eggs, that can be done, or everybody can be duped, but there's so many things and steps you can take to help your own clients avoid getting taken advantage of. And I think that's really important for kids, if parents trust their kids, for them to be involved in at least some conversations.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other pieces, just building on that, is for people to understand what the role is, particularly in being either an attorney or an executor. I frankly can't imagine anyone who really wants to take over that role. And so we often treat it as, just something easy that gets done. In some cases, to be an executor could take, 3-4 years off of your life, and it could be almost a part-time job. No, I'm not saying every case, but some of them are. And to be an attorney, particularly a healthcare or financial attorney, to be a substitute decision maker, you could have somebody who's in a car accident in their 20s, and you could be a decision-making entity for them for 40 years, right? So we often think about life plans as this very march on. And Evan, you were talking about not appointing older people and younger people, and quite right, that's absolutely what we say. But catastrophes can happen at any age. So part of what I think financial and legal professionals can help is going through those what ifs, and what ifs with the kids as well. And that means, that you need entirely separate accounts that you have to run. You can't mingle any money. You need to keep receipts for absolutely everything. You have to learn trust accounting, which is double types of accounting. You have to be able to show your accounts to the court or the public guardian trustee, or in Alberta, the public guardian plus the public trustee, depending on the circumstances and so forth. And if you hear the job description and what little remuneration you can get, I'm amazed anyone does it. It's a giant pain, and it has real implications for people's lives. So I often ask people, when you're thinking through not just, who do you trust, but who's the type of person that's good with those types of things. So I may love my kids very much, and the gift I may give them is not making them my financial power of attorney, because they're going to be terrible at it. Maybe they don't have a good job even running their own money, but maybe I have a very dear friend who's a bookkeeper and they feel very comfortable doing that. Or alternatively, for healthcare issues, I may not want to put my loved one or even my spouse as my decision maker, because I may want them to be able to grieve or be in an emotional state. I may want somebody who is more comfortable making those decisions, who isn't going to feel that level of guilt and overwhelmingness. So talking them through those types of what if situations, I think, are really helpful and can really relieve people out of what many of us will think, oh, just make the adult kids do it. And you think, oh, did you even meet me? Like, I was a terrible job. Or I live in Taiwan, or I live in Poland. Like, how is that going to be? Or I travel with work. So some practical conversations with your legal and financial professionals are the best thing you can do.
Mm-hmm. Get that whole picture of what's going on and explore all the options.
Laura, you mentioned something a while ago. You're a lawyer, and there's the link with Canage, and you're interested in seniors. How did this all come to be?
I got called to the bar in 1999, and I was always interested in working with vulnerable populations. That was always a piece that I had dealt with. I worked with women in crisis and also children in crisis, and did a lot of some of the big school cases, and also represented health authorities. So it became quite natural that I was interested in this issue. And when we were looking at kind of what is the next horizon for social justice, it became very clear that we had very little on supporting our older populations. And so I got into the issues with elder law, I guess more than 20 years ago, something like that. I don't do private practice anywhere. Well, I do it. I do it on a pro bono basis. But no, I don't need your cases. But I am the CEO of Canada's National Seniors Advocacy Organization. So my work is really more in public policy and advocacy space. And I teach at the University of Toronto as well.
It's incredible. And it sounds like you've made some really substantive changes and gotten some protections in place for seniors. That's incredible.
Really happy to see that the financial sector is starting to take us really seriously. I previously served as a director on the Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments, which is a dispute resolution body for the financial sector. And after that, I served as a board member for IROC, which is the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada. And now I'm really honored to be serving on what we're still calling the new SRO. And hopefully when people will have seen this, we'll actually have a name for it. But it's the merged, if you will, organization that oversees the financial sector from the Mutual Fund Dealers Association and IROC together. So what's really been inspiring to me is really since about 2017, the investment sector has started taking this really seriously. And I would even point out the leadership as well in Alberta and in New Brunswick and in Quebec, who've all taken this, I think, especially seriously. So it's good to see that, because people need resources, and whether it be public-facing resources or support for advisors and lawyers, these are the issues of the day. Unless you're dealing with children, you're dealing with older people, whether that's in medicine or in law or in finance.
Right. I imagine there's like trickle up, down. I don't know which way it trickles, but when governments become more aware of that as well, then maybe there's more resources and consideration to help police forces then investigate these types of crimes and treat them more seriously. Like one of the heartstrings when you said that, like, no one cares about grandma's vacuum, like that is heartbreaking and so tragic to me, right? But it's not just always vacuums that get ignored. There can be larger things that are going on that don't get probably taken as seriously as they could or should be, because there are other things going on. Someone's stabbed in the street or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, it is. It really is a protect yourself point, which is why conversations like this are really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So IROC, that's one of our favorite organizations. Kim's chuckling because we have to clear every one of the transcripts from these. We have to clear it through It's IROC, right? That we have to do that with, Kim?
Through compliance, which basically gets their marching orders from our regulatory organizations.
I don't think it's IROC that's going to require your compliance. It's going to be your internal compliance people.
Exactly.
I do think it's important to say, as I always do, that I'm just speaking on my behalf and behalf of Canage. I never try to wear any other hat that I'm wearing. So there's my disclaimer.
And we have disclaimers at the end for Kim as well. She gets all the disclaimers. Heather and I have like a little brief one.
I don't want to be high maintenance, but we're going to have Harold Geller on to talk about the mistakes that financial advisors are making and how people can arm themselves with good information so they don't get taken advantage of. Like, we really are serious on this program to giving people access to just as good information, making sure that they aren't taken advantage of. And today was just so fascinating. It feeds into so many of our conversations we've had on this podcast. And so many seniors are looking for this information because they don't want to get taken advantage of. Laura, you're just a wealth of information. It's amazing.
Well, yeah. I'm glad you're doing the podcast. Thank you for doing it. And thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being our guest. I've learned a ton and I have about 1 million more questions. But yeah, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, I agree. It's such an important topic. And I think what you said, what you described really touches on why it's so important to shine a light on this, because people will self-isolate because of shame and fear of losing autonomy. And, we're all going to be old one day if we're lucky. And, so I just think of like, well, how would I want to be treated? And of course I could fall prey to a scammer. And as you get older, like, yeah, you're not as sharp as you once were, but that doesn't mean that you've lost your faculties. And so I hope that this just gives people some compassion and as well awareness of signs of things to look for. And hopefully we can keep, even if we just keep one grandma or grandpa from getting ruined by a fraudster, then it will have been a successful episode, I think.
Mm-hmm. It's a great way of looking at it. Now I hear you get to be a two-timer, so I'm happy to come back and chat about something else if you like.
Oh, we'd love that. I've got 3 or 4 ideas, I think, probably.
Yeah, it's an elite group for sure, but I think you have the potential to be a member.
5 times club kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to come up with some green jackets or something like that for our returning.
That's the 5-timer club, Kim.
5-timer club. Oh dear. All right. Well, this is wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for being our guest. Take care.
Any information in this video is general information only and is not, nor is it intended to be, legal advice. Watching this video does not create a lawyer-client relationship. You should always seek the advice of a lawyer or other qualified professional for advice regarding your individual situation. While we take care to ensure that the information contained in this video is accurate and up to date, we make no warranties or representations as to the suitability, completeness, or accuracy of the information contained in this video. Any reliance you place on the information is at your own risk. Kahane Law Office, Merrick Law, Heather Malarick Professional Corporation, Evan Clark Professional Corporation, Evan Clark, Heather Malarick, and any guests will not be responsible nor liable in any way for any content, including but not limited to any errors or omissions in the content, or for any loss or damage of any kind occurred as a result of any content communicated in this video, whether by Evan Clark, Heather Malarick, or by a third party. Kim McDonald is a financial advisor with Raymond James Limited. Information provided is not a solicitation, and although obtained from sources considered reliable, is not guaranteed. The view and opinions contained in this media are those of Kim McDonald, not Raymond James Limited. Securities-related products and services are offered through Raymond James Limited, member Canadian Investor Protection Fund. Insurance products and services are offered through Raymond James Financial Planning Limited, which is not a member Canadian Investor Protection Fund. Raymond James advisors are not tax advisors, and we recommend that clients seek independent advice from a professional advisor on tax-related matters. Insurance products and services are offered through Raymond James Financial Planning Limited, RJFP, a subsidiary of Raymond James Limited, which is not a member Canadian Investor Protection Fund. When providing life insurance products, financial advisors are acting as insurance representatives of RJFP.
Darkness of the dales dissipates, decline.